For by a single offering Christ has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer any offering for sin. No longer any offering for sin. And so concludes our reading today from the letter to the Hebrews. During this closing of the liturgical year, we only have one more week left in this liturgical year. We start all over again the Sunday after with the first Sunday of Advent. So here at its close, as it's kind of narrowing to a final conclusion, we have been getting reading after reading after reading in our epistle section from the letter to the Hebrews. 7 readings in a row we have had from the letter to the Hebrews. And reading after reading after reading has been building and undergirding the singular point that in Christ our Lord we have a great, an eternal, and a lasting high priest. A singular high priest. A high priest who will never die, who intercedes on our behalf and on behalf of the world, and through his one and only sacrifice, all has been set right now and forever, for Christ is our high priest. And that's great news. And we ought to be super excited. And that ought to really jazz us up. And it could be that this lacks a little of the theological heft that it might have otherwise, because we're not exactly steeped in the temple sacrificial system anymore. There has not been a temple in Jerusalem for about 2,000 years. It is not within our daily life to be considering which animals do we need to sacrifice for which sins. Odds are that few of you stopped on the way to church this morning and made sure you had sufficient turtle doves to sacrifice before you could receive communion. Am I right? Did somebody actually bring a bird? All right then. So the news that Christ is our great high priest might not hit us with the same force that it ought to, because this isn't something that we're dealing with on a daily basis. We don't really think about the sacrifice and the blood and the animals and the temple and this whole sort of system that was intended to get people right with God and to keep them right with God based off of sacrifice. And yet, the news is great nonetheless. Christ is our great and our lasting and our eternal great high priest. And believe it or not, we actually still respond to this. We actually still have it resonate within us, whether we realize it or not. It's true. We need a great high priest. We long for a great and eternal high priest, even though we don't tend to think about it, even though we don't tend to consider the temple, even though we're never bothering with animals or sacrifices or blood or any of those other sorts of things, because all of the issues at the heart of this are still issues today. These are issues that sink inside of us, issues that ring in our ears, because this stuff is still important, whether we would articulate it in this way or not. Let me give you a for instance. It is fairly popular to talk about the effects of karma, right? I mean, you probably know fewer Hindus than most, and yet this concept of karma can be talked about by sort of anyone, anywhere. This idea that what goes around comes around. And maybe you've even said that at some point. But the sense that when you do bad, just wait. Bad will come back to you. When you do good, the converse of that, good will come back to you, right? We talk about maybe sometimes paying it forward. Somebody does something nice for us, and then we can take that as an opportunity to kind of pass those blessings along. You do something nice for someone else, who will then do something nice for someone else, and on and on and on and on. You kind of perpetuate the good, and you can kind of eliminate the bad. Accentuate the positive. positive, negative? These are terms and these are concepts that we still use in daily life, don't we? About, well, you'll get what's coming to you. That at some level, we have a sense of there being cosmic scales that need to be balanced. When bad stuff happens, it's got to be compensated for some way. Stuff is out of whack and out of balance, and we need to kind of right it again. Bad things happen, compensate with good. Good things happen, and you try to emphasize and accentuate it. We still tell people, and at some fundamental level we know, that you get what you deserve. Right? You got to pay the piper. No such thing as a free lunch. That is the sacrificial system of the temple. And we still resonate it with today. Though we don't have this formal theological system set up, we still resonate with that sense of there's bad in this world. Every culture, every time, every place, every person has that understanding at some fundamental level that there is bad. There's stuff that's broken, it doesn't work, this is not the way things ought to be. I do rotten things, people do rotten things to me, and it shouldn't be that way. And I'm convinced it's because we're built to respond to that. It is the law of the universe. And we are created to respond to this sense, this awareness that there is bad. It shouldn't be that way. What do we do about it? How do we fix it? How do we get rid of it? How do we compensate for it? How do we balance out those scales? It's the way the world works. It's the way the universe is running. How everything has been set up. It's common to all humanity, regardless of the incidentals about how bad it is to a different person or what the actual list is. Every person everywhere has that sense about them. Dogs, for instance, do not. There is no moral quandary for a dog. We follow ours around all day long, picking up after them what we find in the room and spraying it with that stuff that says now they won't mark it anymore, and they still do. They seem to have no moral problem with that. They seem to never even consider it. And yet, people do. We think about it. We worry about it. What is to be done about it? I've done something bad. How can I make it better? How can I make it up to you? Don't we say that? Things happen to us. Don't we want justice? Or don't we want that to be right? Or don't we want them to get their just desserts? That is the temple sacrificial system that formalizes these cosmic scales and balances them out. That when certain things go wrong, when certain bad things are done to you or by you, that there's a way to set that right again. That you balance it out, and depending on the sin, depending on the offense, depending on what happened, then that would then necessitate the certain animal or type of sacrifice, or the number of animals, or whatever it might be. But that's what it was all about. Balancing out those scales, making things right again. Well, there is no temple anymore. What are we to do? Does that mean that everything is right and everything is good? That we never have any problems? We never have that sense of how do we make up for this bad thing that's happened? Jesus himself will offer a prophecy in our gospel reading. The disciples are super impressed at the temple. It's beautiful, magnificent, it's gorgeous. And Jesus says, and it's going away. Not one stone will be left upon another. And within a single generation, roughly AD 70, Jerusalem will be overrun by the Romans. Judea will be conquered. And the second temple will be leveled, destroyed. Not a single stone will be left on top of another. To such a degree that recent archaeology has actually found stones from the temple used to build other Roman works. Obliterated and gone. How then can the temple sacrificial system to make things right continue on if there is no temple? Things still need to be made right. Bad things still happen. We still do bad things, and we still might feel like, what do I do with it? How do I make it right? How do I make it better? How do I fix things? It's simple. You still need a high priest. We still need a great high priest who can make right what we cannot. Because we can't, can we? Can you make things right when you take them wrong? Can you fix the bad that has been done to you or to someone else? How do you work that out? If I go over and I take $5 out of your pocket, okay, that was bad. Well, I'll just give you $5 back. Does that sort of balance it out? Sort of, kind of. I think the argument could be made that the violence of the act to take it from me has now increased it. Fine, here's 10. Now we're done. Right? Maybe. Maybe there's a way to say for some of these things we can kind of go tit for tat and then it's all fair and square and even Steven. But what happens with things that you cannot go with some kind of one-to-one correlation? When somebody has said something mean and nasty and hurtful to you, how do they make it up to you? By saying something good? Is there an equivalency there? Like, if you say something that's this bad, if you say something that's this good, it all sort of balances out? Does it actually work that way? Of course not. When you hurt someone, when you are hurt, physically, abuse, neglect, someone has caused real sadness or suffering, how can they really make it up? They can't. They can't. Someone is killed. Someone is murdered. There is no jail sentence. There is no execution. There is no recompense to society that will bring the person who is dead back to life. For all of these things, they don't really set things to right, do they? Not unless you can go back in time and make it not have happened. Because even when we try to sort of pay stuff back or balance those scales, it still happens. You can't make it unhappen. How do we do that? What do we need? We need a great high priest. We cannot set it to right. We cannot balance those scales. We cannot make it as though it has never happened. We still need this temple sacrificial system. We just need it done better. We need it done fuller. We need it done forever and ever and ever and ever. And that's why for 7 weeks we have been getting readings from Hebrews. That Christ is our great high priest. And the powerfully good news that truly is, we just need to remember why. Though there may not be a temple, we may not be offering goats or bulls or turtle doves every day, we still know some way, somehow, that stuff ain't right. And it needs to be set right. It needs to be made right. Things need to be balanced out, made clean. The bad needs to be fixed. The good needs to be emphasized. The hurt needs to be washed away. I don't know how to do it. I try and I try and I try and it doesn't work. I need a great high priest. That's why this is such good news. He's a great and eternal and an enduring high priest who has offered that sacrifice that really can balance those cosmic scales. Who has offered a singular sacrifice once for all to finally make things right in a way that we never, ever, ever could. At some level, again, I think we know this. I think we resonate to this sense of, I want to make it right. I've done wrong, I want to make it right. Somebody's done wrong to me, they ought to make it right. And how do you do that when we are trapped in the present? We cannot go back and fix the past. We cannot go into the future and ensure it all works out. It has to come from outside of us. It has to come from bigger than us, and better than us, and more full than us. We need a great high priest. Shedding of the blood. Ew. Okay, now we're just getting creepy. Well, once again, we don't live in a sacrificial temple theological society, but we still know fundamentally that there's something about blood. We really do, don't we? There's something special, significant, that is beyond what you find in a medical textbook. Some of us see blood and you get a little, why? It's just red stuff. It comes right out of your body. What's the big deal? We know, some way, somehow, that it's connected to something deeper and more significant and more important than a simple biological function. Interestingly enough, I think that's why, at least in this society, every generation has their vampire story. It's true. It is totally true. Whether it's Bela Lugosi or it's Christopher Lee. A generation ago, oh gosh, this is dating me, it was Tom Cruise. Believe it or not, the vampire Lestat. And he was, oh so handsome and debonair. We even have vampires today, right? And they're sparkly. Every generation has a vampire story because we know blood is important. And at some fundamental level, we resonate with this thought of the blood is somehow connected to our life force or something, and that when you lose it, you lose something essential, something critical, something fundamental about you. And that is, again, the temple sacrificial system. Beyond its biological functions, blood points to something deeply powerful and fundamental, the best, the deepest, the most significant life force or element of you, whatever it might be, and that is why, without the shedding of blood, there was no forgiveness of sins. At some level, we know that there's nothing more than we can give. Blood, sweat, and tears. Does that mean you actually intend to cut yourself? No. By saying it's going to take blood, sweat, and tears, it means like every scrap of me, the deepest part of me has to be sacrificed. Sacrifice. We still know it. We still know these things. We still understand them, though we don't put it in these terms. We still need a great high priest and some kind of sacrifice, some kind of blood, and it's got to set things right forever and ever and ever, because we can't do it, and the bulls and the turtle doves, they ain't coming. No longer is there a temple. No longer can there be the sacrifice to get right, to make things right, or that once a year at Yom Kippur, where everything is brought back to one. You are atoned for by bringing at one with each other and with God. And you're good for next year. See you in a year. No more. No more. The temple is gone. It's destroyed. And it's gone, it's destroyed because it is no longer needed. There is a singular sacrifice that is good once for all. Not just for a year, not just for a particular sin, but once for all. On the cross, the blood of the great high priest himself was shed, and the cosmic scales are balanced. That which is wrong can be made right. That which is broken can be redeemed. That which was dead can be brought back to life. That's the point that we've been getting week after week after week after week for 7 weeks from the letter of the Hebrews. 6 weeks ago it started with Hebrews 1. Where Christ reflects the glory of God and bears the very stamp of God's nature, upholding the universe by his word of power. He has made the purifications of sins by the grace of God. It is Christ who tastes death on behalf of everyone. He is the pioneer of salvation, made perfect through his suffering. 5 weeks ago, we were reminded that we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses. He knows what it's like to live this life. He knows what it's like to be hurt and to suffer. He even knows what it's like to be tempted, but he himself has never sinned. Therefore, since he knows, since he understands, and since he sympathizes, we might approach the throne of grace with confidence. 4 weeks ago from Hebrews 5, we were reminded that it is God himself who appoints Christ as our eternal high priest. In his life, he operated as a priest. He was constantly offering up prayers and supplications on behalf of his people, just like a priest does. In his death, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God as a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Made perfect, source of salvation, that even through his death, he is crowned an everlasting priest. 3 weeks ago from Hebrews 7, we've seen in his life how he's a priest, in his death how he's a priest. Hebrews 7 says, now in his resurrected glory, he is a priest, because he is perpetually and constantly and continually offering prayers and supplications on our behalf. Human priests get tired and they go to sleep. He does not. Human priests get old and they die. He does not. In eternal glory, he is always there interceding on our behalf. In his eternal glory, he is always there praying for us, supporting for us. He always lives to make intercession for them. It was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, blameless, unstained, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those other priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins, and then for those of his people. He did it once for all when he offered up the sacrifice of himself. Eternally and gloriously, he didn't have to worry about sacrifice every single day. He didn't have to offer a sacrifice for himself so that he could be clean enough to offer a sacrifice for you. It is done once in his perfection. It is done once in his sacrifice. It is done once in his blood. For that was the reading from 2 weeks ago. We missed it because of All Saints and because we transferred the reading. This is the reading you would have heard. It's short. I will read it to you in total. This is from Hebrews 9. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater, more perfect tent, not made with hands, he entered once for all into the holy place, taking not the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For the sprinkling of defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sanctifies through the purification of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, so purify your conscience from dead works to serve a living God. Our great high priest is truly great, for he offers not the blood of animals, he offers his own blood. It is not the blood of a bull or a goat or a bird that will set you right, that will balance that cosmic scale. It was the blood of God himself. Eternal, sinless, blameless, offered for all of us, offered for you. And he has done so in the true and everlasting temple. Not the one made of wood and sticks and stones, the one that gets leveled in AD 70. That was a copy. That was a shadow. That was a reflection of the real and lasting and eternal temple in heaven. And that is where he made this offering. And that is where he serves as our high priest forever. This was last week, Hebrews 9. For Christ has entered not into a sanctuary made by hands, a copy of the true one, but into heaven himself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. And then finally this week it concludes, Hebrews 10. For by a single offering he is perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Where there is forgiveness of sins, there is no longer any offering for sin. There is no temple in Jerusalem, and there doesn't need to be. It is finished. Words of Jesus. It is finished on the cross. It is finished through his own blood. He is our great high priest. And that is such good news. That's why we got this for 7 weeks. That's why it's worth getting for 7 weeks. Even if we don't naturally understand it, somehow, deep inside, we really do. Even if this seems kind of foreign to us, or I don't really get it, or it seems like something we did a long, long time ago, but good thing we don't do that anymore, At some fundamental level, it's exactly what we ask for, and it's exactly what we need. Some way, somehow, we still want the balances to be made, for stuff to be set right, for our bad to somehow be made up, the bad to us somehow be made better. And this is the gift and the promise and the sacrifice of Christ, our great high priest. That which is bad can be made good. That which is broken can be redeemed. And that which is dead can be brought to eternal and everlasting life. So we might not think that way, we might not see that way, we might not act that way on a daily basis. Thank God that He has answered the prayer of our hearts we didn't even know we had. And He has given us exactly what it is that we need: a great and eternal and a lasting high priest who has made a sacrifice once for all, now and forever.